What would you do if, every night, in the silence of your own apartment, something unseen waited for the lights to go out? Would you ignore the creak of the floorboards? Pretend the heavy knock on your door was nothing more than the pipes? Or would you admit that something was already inside with you? This is not a tale set in some distant past. It happened to a young man in Atlanta, someone who thought living alone would mean peace. Instead, each night pushed him closer to a truth no one would ever want to face. By his final night, he wasn't alone anymore. If you believe you'd have the courage to last even a single night in his place, prove it. Subscribe right now. Most won't make it past this story. He was 24 years old, fresh out of school, beginning a new job, and eager to start a life on his own. Atlanta was meant to be a city of opportunity, a place where the noise of downtown would drown out any sense of loneliness. But inside his apartment, silence dominated. The building itself was older than it looked from the outside. Cracks ran like veins along the plastered walls. Paint peeled in the corners, exposing layers from years before. The faint buzz of the streetlights outside his window was constant, and every so often, the wail of a distant siren echoed through the city. It was never completely quiet outside. Inside, though, it was another story. The young man kept to himself. He hadn't made many friends in the city yet. His co-workers were polite but distant, and his neighbors never seemed to linger in the hallways. Alone, he found comfort in routine, commuting, eating, scrolling on his phone, then heading to bed. He believed that the quiet would bring rest. Instead, it became a stage. Small details began to gnaw at him. The light in the hallway flickered whenever he passed beneath it, as if reacting to him alone. At night, when he turned the lock on his front door, he sometimes swore it clicked a second time, though his hands were nowhere near it. He told himself it was nerves, or the quirks of an aging building. But the feeling of being watched, of being measured by something unseen, only grew heavier. Some apartments carry history, scratches, stains, and secrets buried beneath the paint. His carried something else. His carried screams. His first night should have been uneventful. A quiet evening after work, the same as countless others. He ate, scrolled on his phone, and switched off the lights. By midnight, the city outside had calmed to a low hum, and the apartment sat in stillness. That was when it started. From above him, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, one after the other. He froze in his bed, staring upward, confused. Because he lived on the top floor, there was no one above him. At first he rationalized. Maybe the sound was traveling from another part of the building. Maybe the pipes expanding, or a neighbor walking heavily below. He tried to push it from his mind, but the noise continued, pacing, crossing back and forth, as if someone was walking directly above his ceiling. Finally, it stopped. Silence returned, and he allowed his eyes to drift shut. But only minutes later came another sound. This time not above him, but inside his own apartment. The slow drag of wood against wood. A chair being pulled across the living room floor. He lay stiff under his blanket, every muscle locked, his breath caught in his chest. He knew he hadn't left a chair out, and he knew no one else had a key. For long minutes, he did nothing. He stayed frozen, staring at the ceiling, pretending it was nothing. He told himself over and over that if he didn't move, it would pass. Then, without warning, a single, deafening bang rattled his bedroom door. One violent strike, as if something on the other side had slammed against it. And then nothing. Silence stretched into the dark. He didn't move for the rest of the night. The following day felt ordinary. The sun filtered weakly through his blinds, and the usual rhythm of city life resumed. He went to work, answered emails, spoke briefly with co-workers, and returned home without incident. Nothing unusual. Nothing that hinted at what would return when night fell. As evening came, the apartment seemed unchanged. Yet when he stepped into the hallway to collect his mail, the light above flickered. Once, twice, long enough for the shadows along the walls to shift unnaturally. He stood still, sensing something at the edge of his vision. At the far end of the corridor, tall, motionless. A figure, too distant to make out clearly, but its shape unmistakable. It stood as if waiting. He blinked, and in that instant it was gone. Back inside, unease settled over him. He turned on the television, hoping background noise would steady his nerves. But through the thin walls of the old building came a sound that did not belong. A low murmur, whispering. He pressed mute. The voices grew clearer. Words half-formed, broken, but distinct enough to chill him. Leave, leave. He moved closer to the wall, ear straining. What he heard then made his skin tighten. A pause in the whispers, followed by his name. Spoken softly, as though breathed directly into his ear. He grabbed his phone, desperate to capture proof, to reassure himself later that it was only imagination. He pressed record and held it out. The room was quiet. He stopped the recording, played it back. The playback began in silence. Then faint, there it was, his own breathing, and layered over it another. Not his voice, not his tone. A second voice whispering his name. Repeated. Urgent. He fumbled, hands slick, the phone slipping from his grasp. The screen hit the floor. For a moment it glitched, flickering between static and black, before the light died completely. That was how the second night ended. On the third night, he woke to a sound unlike any before. The walls themselves seemed to strain. A groan ran through the beams, long and deep, as if the apartment carried a weight it could no longer bear. He sat up, heart quickening, trying to convince himself it was only the settling of old wood. But then he noticed the air. It had changed. Heavy, suffocating. He could feel it pressing against his chest, thick like smoke though no fire burned. Each breath was labor. He coughed once, convinced there must be something leaking into the room. Yet the air had no chemical sting, no sharpness. Instead, it carried a strange scent, charred, bitter. The smell of wood burnt long ago, carried now as if from another place. He rose to his feet, unsteady, and crossed to the small bathroom mirror. He turned on the light. At first, nothing. Only his reflection, pale and drawn. But as he leaned closer, he saw it. A hand, resting on his shoulder. Large, dark, its fingers curved across his shirt. He spun around. No one. Only silence. Yet in the glass, the hand remained for one instant longer, before fading back into his own reflection. He didn't run. He should have. He told himself leaving in the middle of the night was foolish, that there would be no safe place outside those doors anyway. He forced himself back to bed, burying his fear under the weight of denial. He didn't run. That was his mistake. And so the third night ended, with him lying awake until dawn, the smell of smoke never leaving the room, the weight of unseen breath filling every corner. Would you have stayed after this night? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're still watching, you're braver than most. By the fourth night, exhaustion had set in. He hadn't slept properly in days. Every sound, every flicker of shadow left him restless. Desperate for comfort, he left the television on, its soft glow painting the walls of his bedroom. He thought the noise would keep him company, maybe drown out whatever else stirred in the silence. For a while it worked. He drifted into shallow sleep. Until, without warning, the screen cut to static. The time on the clock read 3:12 a.m. He stirred, eyes half opening. That was when he realized he couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, at least that's what the rational mind would call it. His body was rigid, locked to the mattress. His eyes darted, panic building as he tried to will his arms, his legs, anything to respond. But he lay still, trapped inside himself. And then he saw her. At the edge of his bed, a shape. A woman's silhouette, bent slightly forward, as though leaning closer with each breath. She did not blur with the static of the TV. She was distinct, present, watching. The air carried a new scent, thick and damp, the smell of wet earth, like soil freshly turned after rain. His nostrils filled with it. He wanted to gag, but his throat was sealed. The figure leaned closer. He could feel her presence pressing down, as if the mattress itself sank under invisible weight. A sound followed, sharp, grating, nails dragging slowly across fabric. Long, deliberate strokes pulling across the blanket near his legs. Each scrape sent shivers racing through his chest. And then a whisper, close, directly into his ear. Words he couldn't understand, but words not meant for comfort. His eyes watered, his chest burned. And then, as quickly as it began, the paralysis broke. He bolted upright, gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was empty. The television screen was black. No figure, no whisper, no nails on the blanket, only silence. He tried to steady himself, clutching the phone on his nightstand. And then it rang. The alarm blared, harsh, piercing. He dropped it instantly. Because he knew the truth, the phone was powered off. That was how his fourth night ended. By the fifth day, the strain was showing. He carried dark circles beneath his eyes, his steps unsteady from nights without rest. As he locked his door to head out, he noticed someone watching him. At the end of the hall stood an elderly woman. She lived 2 doors down, her gray hair tied back neatly, her thin frame leaning heavily on a cane. For weeks she had passed him without a word. But now she didn't move. She just stared. When he offered a nervous smile, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but the words carried clearly. "You live in 3C?" He nodded. She lowered her eyes, almost in pity, then muttered words that froze him where he stood. People don't last there. They hear the dead walking. Before he could respond, she turned away, shuffling back into her apartment and shutting the door behind her. He stood in silence, the echo of her words heavy in his chest. That night, sleep never came. He lay in bed listening, every sound amplified by memory of her warning. Then came the first knock. Sharp, hollow, against the wall beside his bed. He sat up. Another knock followed. Then another. Not random. A rhythm. A pattern. He counted, heart hammering. Long, short, short. Short, long. Short again. He didn't know Morse code, but he knew it wasn't meaningless. Hours later, when the pattern repeated, he grabbed his laptop and searched. He typed out the sequence carefully, his fingers trembling. The result appeared on the screen. 2 words. Simple. Clear. Get out. But he didn't leave. He stayed. And with that choice, the apartment held him tighter. Midnight came, and with it, the collapse of every light in the apartment. No flicker. No warning. One moment the rooms were dimly lit, the next they were drowned in complete darkness. He reached for the switch on the wall. Nothing. He tried another. Still nothing. The building was silent, but he could tell this was no outage. The hum of electricity had died entirely inside his unit. It was as if the walls themselves had chosen to sever him from the rest of the city. Reaching for his drawer, he found a candle and struck a match. The flame bloomed small and fragile, casting a wavering circle of light that barely stretched across the room. He exhaled in relief. But then, without him moving, the flame bent sideways, dragged toward his shoulder, as if someone unseen had leaned close and blown against it. His chest tightened. He raised the candle higher, the shadows stretching long across the walls. That was when he saw it. From the far corner of the ceiling, something shifted. A shadow broke away from the darkness and began to move. Not walking, crawling. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles, pulling it slowly across the plaster. He held the candle still, his breath caught, watching as it crept nearer, closer, until it hung above him like a predator circling from above. Terrified, he reached for his phone, flicked on the camera, and aimed it upward. The screen showed nothing at first. Then, clear as daylight, the image appeared. A figure, upright, standing directly behind him. He whipped around, heart pounding. Empty space. No one there. But when he turned the phone back to his face, the figure remained in the frame. Closer now, so near its outline blurred into his own reflection. His hands shook violently, the candle trembling. He dropped the phone, the screen skidding across the floor, the image breaking into static before going black. The 6th night proved one truth. He wasn't imagining it anymore. Something else lived in that apartment. If this was your home, would you move out or stay? Subscribe right now if you'd never risk it. By the 7th night, the apartment no longer whispered. It attacked. He returned from work with a heaviness in his chest, dreading what awaited. The silence pressed down as he set his bag by the door. For a brief moment, he thought perhaps the night would pass quietly. Then the first crash erupted. A plate launched itself from the kitchen counter, shattering against the wall. He ran forward, stunned, only for a second dish to lift and explode at his feet. Doors throughout the apartment began to slam shut, one after another, as though every room wanted him locked out. He backed away, his pulse roaring in his ears, as cupboard doors flung open and shut in a violent rhythm. Then came the sound from the refrigerator, a low groan of hinges opening on their own. Slowly, deliberately, the door swung wide. He staggered closer, and what he saw made his stomach seize. Inside were trays of meat, but not fresh, gray, spoiled, crawling with insects. He had never bought them. He had never stored them there. Yet the stench filled the air, rancid and overwhelming, forcing him to gag as he stumbled backward. Desperate, he fled to the bathroom and locked the door. His breaths came in short bursts, his back pressed against the tile. For a moment, he thought he'd found refuge. Then the mirror fogged. At first faint, as though the air had thickened with steam. But no shower ran. No heat filled the room. Letters began to carve themselves into the haze. One by one, deliberate strokes forming a single word. Tonight. His chest tightened, the word burning into his mind. The sink rattled. He spun toward it, horrified, as every faucet in the bathroom burst to life. Water poured out, rushing violently. But it wasn't clear. It was dark red, staining the porcelain as it swirled and overflowed. He scrambled back against the wall, too afraid to touch it, too terrified to move closer. The 7th night left no question. Whatever lived in that apartment had chosen him, and it had promised tonight. The 8th night was his last. He knew it the moment the sun went down. The air felt charged, heavy, as if the walls themselves had been waiting. He packed a bag in haste, tossing in his phone, his wallet, anything he thought he might need. He headed for the door, heart racing. But when he turned the lock, the handle refused to give. He yanked harder, then harder still. It wouldn't budge. It was as though the frame had been nailed shut, the wood fused in place. He tried the windows next, throwing the blinds aside. But what stared back at him was no longer the lights of Atlanta, no glow of street lamps or distant cars. Each window opened onto the same impossible scene, a dense, black forest. Branches twisted and reached like arms, shrouded in mist. No matter which window he turned to, the view was the same. His apartment no longer overlooked the city. It had been moved or swallowed. He staggered from room to room, frantic, his breathing shallow. That was when the whispers began. Not one voice this time. Dozens. Distorted, overlapping, moving in unison. They seeped through the cracks of the apartment, surrounding him. Each word indecipherable, but their rhythm undeniable. They were not warning him now. They were claiming him. Figures began to emerge from the corners. Blurred shapes, elongated, shifting with each step. Their whispers filled his skull, drowning every thought. He ran, stumbling, until at last he threw himself into the closet, slamming the door shut. In the dark, he fumbled with his phone, the screen trembling in his hands as he pressed record. At first, it showed only his terrified face, eyes darting wildly. Then something changed. On the screen, behind his reflection, another image appeared. His own face again, but smiling. Wide, unnatural, smiling where he could not. He froze, staring at the contradiction. His breath hitched, his body shaking as the distorted grin in the glass leaned closer, filling the screen. That was the last recording he ever made. By morning, he was gone. His family reported him missing when calls went unanswered. Days later, police entered the apartment. What they found was unlike anything they could explain. The space was untouched, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry, no trace of struggle. The front door was locked from the inside, yet no one answered. But the walls told another story. Every surface, from the living room to the bedroom, was smothered in handprints. Hundreds of them, some small, some large. They covered the paint in overlapping layers, pressed deep enough that fragments of plaster had chipped away. All of them smeared, as if clawing outward. The officers wrote it off as vandalism, though no intruder could have left without breaking the locks. And no intruder could have pressed so many hands against those walls in silence. To this day, the apartment remains unoccupied. Leasing records show tenants never last more than a few weeks. And at night, those who pass through the hallway have reported something else. Not footsteps, not whispers, but a voice. A man's voice, calling faintly through the walls, begging, pleading, "Let me out." Some say if you listen closely at night in that building, you'll hear his voice begging to get out. If you made it this far, you're among the few who can face the darkness. Prove it, subscribe right now. And if you won't, at least share your theory in the comments. Maybe you'll help explain what happened. His story ended in silence. The apartment was emptied, his belongings left behind, his presence erased as though he had never lived there at all. Yet the questions remain. What claimed him? Where did he go? And why does that building still whisper in the dark? You've followed his nights. You've seen the walls close in. You've heard the warnings he ignored. But now the question turns to you. Would you survive alone at night? Remember, it only takes one night.